Captain Midnight.
This video is brought to you by Skillshare. So, Spider-Man Far From Home is coming out this week, bringing with it the end of the MCU's Phase 3. I'll probably be digging deep into that movie next week, but in this video I wanted to do something a little different for the channel. As many of you probably know, Mysterio in Far From Home isn't Jake Gyllenhaal's first brush with the franchise, as he nearly replaced Tobey Maguire in Spider-Man 2. He's even talked about this a bit on the press tour. But the more I looked into what I thought was just kind of a weird little fun fact, the more I felt like I wanted to tell this story in a video. Considering how great Spider-Man 2 turned out, how important the character himself is, and how many weird twists and turns there are in this, it just seems like a story worth telling. First, I want to credit my sources, which you can find in the description below. Both the LA Times and Variety did a lot of great reporting on this back in the early 2000s. And second, it should be said that although I've tried my best to tell the most well-researched version of this story that I can, there's a lot of people involved that have given a lot of different statements of these events through the years, many of them even contradicting each other. The real events were probably even more complicated and involved factors that I wasn't able to include here simply because they weren't really publicly discussed in interviews or reported on. So with all that being said, let's take a little trip back to the year 2000.
Surprise!
2000 was the year that Sam Raimi's Spider-Man cast the young Tobey Maguire as Peter Parker. It was considered a mildly odd move at the time since he didn't exactly have a lot of star power. He was respected as an actor though, having starred in Pleasantville and the year's critically acclaimed Wonder Boys. But Spider-Man wasn't a mid-budget quirky dramedy. It was a $140 million movie. That was even more than Mission Impossible 2, which seemed like a much safer bet with a much bigger star at the helm. As for the director, Sam Raimi had made movies with big cult followings and had done a few studio films, but he'd never been trusted with a movie on this scale before. It may seem like an obvious hit now, but in 2000, after decades in development hell, many thought Spider-Man could be a catastrophic flop for Columbia. Raimi felt that pressure intensely.
I feel like there's a great bar of expectation that I have to meet. It better be damn good. That's all I'm thinking, and that's what occupies all of my waking hours and all of my sleepless nights. Is it good enough? Is it right for the character? All I can do is what makes the character work for me, and what I was attracted to when I read the comic books, and try and bring that to the big screen in a Spider-Man movie and hope that appeals to everyone else.
In the end though, everything obviously worked out fine. Better than fine, really, as Spider-Man ended up being the first movie in history to pass $100 million in its first weekend. Raimi and company had pulled it off, as the movie surpassed any expectations that Sony and Columbia could have had for it. So of course, a sequel became inevitable, and Raimi was more than happy to get going on the next installment. Meanwhile, Tobey Maguire was busy shooting Seabiscuit over at Universal, a movie about the famous Depression-era racehorse in which Maguire had a pretty major role as jockey Red Pollard. That film, with its elaborate racing sequences, was a pretty time-consuming project, and Columbia okayed moving production of Spider-Man 2 back from January to April 2003 to accommodate Maguire's shooting schedule. Things were getting a little bit strained though. Although by all accounts they had gotten along well during the filming of the first movie, there was allegedly tension forming between Raimi and Maguire during the earliest pre-production phase of the second. Spider-Man 1 had been well received, but critics agree the movie had its flaws. The big one being the special effects, which Roger Ebert called as convincing as Mighty Mouse.
Hi, boys and girls. Here we go, rocketing into a fun-filled, exciting cartoon show.
That was probably tough for Sam Raimi to hear, considering he grew up loving the art of special effects and prided himself on always doing the best he could with what he had. He knew that Spider-Man 2's effects, with his added experience and a bigger budget, needed to blow the first films out of the water. There was just one problem. To get started working on those effects, Raimi's team needed a new computer scan of Tobey Maguire's body, which they would then use to lay the groundwork for the movie's CG. Their star didn't seem to be in any hurry though, and hadn't shown up to get it done. Now Raimi denies having a lot of friction with Maguire, but he admits that he wasn't thrilled.
I wanted our movie to be the most important thing in his life. I felt he thought this would impact his work on Seabiscuit, Anytime the picture isn't the best that it can be and the effects aren't the best that they can be, I'm not happy at that point. Yes, I really wanted that scan, and yes, I was fighting to get it.
Maguire later said that he regretted this delay and explained the problem in an interview. Part of it was scheduling, and part of it was that I had a beard for Seabiscuit and they needed me clean shaven. I could have come in a little earlier, but I was exhausted and I didn't understand the importance of it. I was working on Seabiscuit 6 days a week, 14 or 15 hours a day, and then it was, do I want to go in on the 7th day for an 8-hour cyber scan? If I had understood the great importance of it for Sam, then I probably would have kicked myself and done it anyway. Maguire went on to admit that his behavior going into Spider-Man 2 was, quote, inappropriate. But the scan would turn out to be the least of Columbia and Maguire's problems. Now, okay, this is where things get complicated and people's stories get a bit conflicting. So first, a little background. Tobey Maguire had signed on to Spider-Man for a reported $3 to $4 million. Obviously, this is far from a small sum, but the movie had performed better than anyone expected. And unlike these days where superhero actors often sign up to their franchises for like 3 to 6 picture deals, Maguire had a chance to renegotiate his pay for the second movie. He was allegedly unhappy that producer Laura Ziskin had made $25 to $30 million off of Spider-Man while he'd made less than half of that, and wanted a significant raise going into Spider-Man 2. This kicked off a pretty tense negotiation, which, from what I can tell, went on a lot longer than these things usually do. Which brings us to Tobey Maguire's back. Spider-Man and Seabiscuit had both been very physical shoots, involving horse riding, hanging up on wires for hours, and combat training. And according to the actor, that had taken a serious toll on his back, which was often in pain during the shooting of Seabiscuit. So his representatives went to Columbia saying that they would need to accommodate his back pain during the Spider-Man 2 shoot. Apparently, this was the last straw for the studio, who, from most accounts, believed it to be nothing more than a negotiating tactic at best, and at worst, an attempt to sabotage their very valuable sequel. Though it should definitely be noted that Maguire denies all of this, calling it, quote, ridiculous, and that money was never the point at all. Fair or not, the idea that he was just holding out for a bigger payday definitely seems to be the assumption that the studio was working under. In addition to that though, Sam Raimi has said he was really worried about the actor's health and was afraid he could permanently injure Maguire's back when shooting the stunt. So they decided to look at other actors, and the name that rose to the top was Jake Gyllenhaal. The star of the feel-good drama October Sky and the cult hit Donnie Darko, Gyllenhaal was exactly the kind of young, soulful actor they could see stepping into the role of Peter Parker. In his recent press tour for Far From Home, Gyllenhaal has kind of downplayed his connection to Spider-Man 2, saying that there was a slew of actors up for the role and he was simply one of them. In an old interview though, Sam Raimi seems to remember things a bit differently, saying they essentially had him ready to take over if Maguire couldn't return.
I had heard that he could be paralyzed if there was an injury to his back, so I called Jake. I said, Jake, Tobey's back is such that I can't be as irresponsible as to ask him to play the part. It breaks my heart because I really wanted him to be in the movie. I think he's the right Spider-Man. But if I can't have Tobey, you're the man for me.
But was a deal with him ever signed? Well, the studio itself denies it, but reporters at the time didn't seem to buy that. Either way though, the point was made very clear to Maguire. He was very close to losing his most well-known role to Jake Gyllenhaal. This didn't go over well for obvious reasons, but maybe for some more personal ones too. So, okay, look. I try to stay away from going too TMZ on this channel. I'm not very interested in actors' personal lives outside their work. But the fact is, Maguire's love life kind of plays a role not once, but twice in this story, so it kind of feels necessary to include it. At the time, it was heavily reported that Gyllenhaal was dating Tobey Maguire's ex-girlfriend. Already kind of an unfortunate coincidence, but made a lot more so by the fact that she was none other than Kirsten Dunst, who I assume you're all familiar with. This probably put all three of them in a pretty awkward position, so understandably none of them have been very eager to discuss it in an interview. Well, except for Sam Raimi, who acknowledged that before shooting, he was worried that Maguire and Dunst would no longer have the same chemistry, since they had broken up around the time that the first movie was released. Anyway, Tobey Maguire was worried. The fact is, Gyllenhaal was a great actor too, and everyone knew it. An anonymous source in Maguire's camp even told the LA Times the move would probably work.
A year from now, the public wouldn't know the difference.
Maguire had been totally shocked by how quickly the studio had been ready to recast. I never understood we were at that point. There was a period where I didn't know what I could do to work it out. I felt a little bit at a loss. So Maguire discussed it with his then girlfriend Jennifer Meyer, who, as luck would have it, was the daughter of Universal Studios president Ronald Meyer, the studio that Maguire was shooting Seabiscuit for. The elder Meyer saw the writing on the wall and thought the situation was much more urgent than Maguire believed. After all, the Spider-Man franchise was Maguire's ticket to superstardom, and losing that could be a huge blow to his career. He pointed to the career of Michael Keaton, who had never really reached the same heights in terms of popularity after he left the role of Batman. An anonymous Hollywood agent quoted at the time agreed, saying,
"You can be a really great actor without being a movie star. If he hadn't returned to Spider-Man, Tobey Maguire, the actor, would have survived. But Tobey Maguire, the multi-million-dollar movie star? I don't know."
So Meyer and Maguire immediately sprung into action to win back the role of the web-slinger. In case they wanted to take Columbia and Sony to court, they tried to hire Burt Fields, a lawyer famous for taking on big studios. But they quickly found out that Fields had just been put on retainer by Columbia. So instead, they decided the best way to go was to get Maguire a clean bill of health. Columbia took a lot of convincing, and Maguire had to undergo a full physical exam and even had to have his doctor talk with Spider-Man 2 stunt coordinators. Eventually though, they relented. Sam Raimi wanted Maguire back, and all seemed to agree that it would be best for the film itself. Still, many on the crew apparently weren't very happy with the actor, and Maguire seems to acknowledge this and even take some responsibility for the falling out, saying, "I'm glad I got to look these people in the face and say, I'm really sorry, I'm gonna do whatever it takes." Maguire also said that he believes most of these issues could have been resolved much easier if he had just gone to the producers and Sam Raimi personally during the production of Seabiscuit, instead of mostly speaking through publicists and agents.
You're responsible for that.
Yep.
Everything seems to have worked out though, as Raimi and company did have a special back brace made for Maguire that was used while shooting stunts. Maguire also did end up getting a raise for the film, though it's hard to say if it was anywhere near what he was initially looking for. Most importantly though, Spider-Man 2 just turned out to be an incredible movie. Ebert even called it one of his favorite films of the year, giving it a glowing 4 stars. We'll probably never know everything that happened behind the scenes that really caused the rift between Tobey Maguire, Sam Raimi, and Columbia, but in the end, at least they were able to put aside all of that and deliver one of the best blockbusters of the 2000s. Definitely one of the most fun parts of researching this video was digging even farther into the career of Sam Raimi, someone who started out truly independent. If you feel the same way and have creative impulses that you want to use but don't quite know how, I definitely need to recommend Be Your Own Boss: Strategies for Launching Your Creative Career. It's a great class on how to use your skills to become an independent artist, no matter what your field of creativity is. Taught by an expert in graphic design whose work has been featured in the Washington Post and Vanity Fair, all while working from her own studio in Berlin. If that sounds like something you'd like to learn from, check it out on Skillshare. That's definitely not all though. Skillshare has over 25,000 courses to pick from on everything from creative writing, marketing, business, and a lot more. So click on the link in the description below and get 2 months of great classes absolutely free. Go to skl.sh/captainmidnight17